Paul, I read your book with some fascination as we're dealing with civil rights issues today, and there's nothing comparable in terms of the sacrifice. Wyatt T. Walker, who helped me start National Action Network, was one of the figures there, and Fred Shuttlesworth, who I knew. I was too young to know Dr. King. They said they selected Birmingham because they knew Bull Connor would come with the kind of brutality that would give the whole world the scenes and graphics of how brutal segregation was. In fact, Bull Connor was getting ready to be out of office, so they needed to go in. Talk about how the strategy was to really select it, because they, as the title of your book implies, they were willing to put it all on the line. Otherwise, they felt the movement was going to die. They needed this confrontation.
You're absolutely right. They felt the movement was going to die, and that's perhaps the best place to start. A lot of people think the civil rights movement exists on some sort of continuum of progress. That was not at all the case in the spring of 1963. Yes, there was the Montgomery bus boycott, and that success there via the Supreme Court saying that the bus lines could be desegregated. But basically, even in Montgomery, come 1963, the buses had basically resegregated, and so every single measure of this, there was basically no success in the civil rights movement. And Wyatt T. Walker and others, they said, let us go down to the very site of terror, white terror. They called it domestic terrorism, and let us angry every terrible person there. Because if we can do that, then perhaps we can get to the conscience of the rest of America and begin to really change it. And I think that, 60 plus years after the fact, this is a deeply, deeply personal story for me, because I'm white, my wife is black, our 3 kids are black. Sonia and I get married in a former Jim Crow state like Texas. And when you think, if we just put this on a continuum of history for a moment, if we could, 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation passes. But for 100 years, there is no progress. And some people, when I was out on book tour, been out on book tour, they've talked about, oh, surely that would have happened. Are we sure of that? Right? Nothing changed across 100 years. Birmingham happens. The Kennedy brothers sponsor legislation. That becomes a Civil Rights Act of 64, then the Voting Rights Act of 65. It leads to King's martyrdom in 68. But I would argue, really, it's a rebirth of his nation. Maybe the first birth of his nation, because from that you see the rise of the black middle and upper class. In the 20th century, you see the presidency of Barack Obama. But again, this is felt on a deeply, deeply granular level for people like me, right, who have no experience with Birmingham, right? My wife and I are able today to raise our 3 kids on a street where no one harasses us for who we are. So Birmingham, Alabama in 1963 literally allows me to live my life today. And that's why this book is really like not only my story, but the story that I want my kids to know. I dedicated this book to them so that they could, in some sense, be guided in their own lives by the courage that those activists showed in 1963.
The new book, entitled You Have to Be Prepared to Die Before You Can Begin to Live, 10 Weeks in Birmingham That Changed America. It's on sale now. You can read an excerpt on our website, joe.msnbc.com. Author Paul Kix, thank you.
Paul, I read your book with some